Welcome everybody to another live stream. We've got a special guest today. We are talking with Tim Mooney from the PedalShift podcast. This was actually a special request from a Patreon supporter. I see he's in the room. Brian, making your dreams come true. So if you support the channel via Patreon, not only do you keep all this good content coming, but I do listen and try to make the comment that you, or the video request that you do, that you make happen. So today we're going to talk about touring during the pandemic, how it's changed the dynamics. Should you even go touring right now? And also what it's like to run a podcast about bikes and bike touring for 7 years. So without further ado, let's welcome our guest, Tim. Howdy.
Russ, what's happening, man? It's been a couple of years. This is fantastic. And Brian, this is all your fault.
Nice. I see you've got an orange Brompton there in the background.
Yeah, I'm on brand 24/7, Russ. Anybody who listens to my show knows that I'm all orange all the time. And yeah, I was like, I saw your hit with the Sprocket guys, and you know, Brock had his bike in the background. I'm like, right. I am not coming on this show and not having a bike in the background. So here we are.
Nice. So for those that might not be familiar with the podcast, can you just break it down, what it's about and how long it's been going on for?
Yeah, so I started the PedalShift project about 6.5 years ago or so. And it was one of those things where I really liked podcasting, and I was just getting into bicycle touring. And I was searching around and going, oh, there's got to be a million podcasts about bicycle touring. Well, it turns out there was none. And I'm one of those jerks that, you know, if something doesn't exist, sometimes I go out and make it myself. And I thought, you know, I'll stick around. My track record with podcasting, I've been doing it for 15 years. I got in really, really early, is I'll do something, I'll do it for about 50 episodes, and then it's all done. That didn't turn out to be the case with this. It turned out that there were people that were interested in bicycle touring and listening all about it. So, I mean, I think the show's really evolved over the bunch of years. I mean, it started off with me just sort of doing tips and tricks and things like that. And as a community started to develop, that got added in. But also, you know, I started doing more tour journals and making that a part of the show. So often I'll go off on a tour and I'll sort of bring listeners along for the ride and do field recordings and just sort of edit all that together. And sometimes there'll be a story and sometimes there won't be. And sometimes it's interesting and sometimes it's just another bike tour. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. And, you know, it went from once a month to every other week. And now it's a weekly show. So there's interest out there, hunger for the content. And I'm super excited to do it because it's fun for me too.
Yeah. How many episodes have you done so far?
Oh, stress question. I think it's 216 if memory serves. Dang. I could pull that up. I'm no Sprocket, but I'm sorry, 219 it appears.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been it's I think I celebrated it'll be 6.5 years this December.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So we've got some people in the room. Let us know where you're watching from. I know Brian is from East Texas. So let's see. And if you guys have any questions for Tim during the live stream, leave those in the comments and I'll be sure to highlight them. Got Luke here from Maryland. You're part of the country. So you're based in DC. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, I spend most of my time in DC. I'll spend a good chunk of my time. I've got a cabin in West Virginia as well. But people ask, I'm a DC guy.
Yeah. Nice. And so what keeps you doing the podcast for so long? I know, like, you know, we have the YouTube channel and it goes in like fits and starts. What is it that keeps you making content?
I think that it's because it's still interesting to me to talk about and interact with folks about this amazing thing that is bicycle touring, and it's always evolving, and my knowledge is evolving, and I learn so much just from talking to folks. I'll do interviews, every tour I learn something new, and then there comes a point, and you may have found this too with the YouTube channel, that it becomes a habit, and you get to a point where it's sort of like, if I don't do a show, it'd be sort of like not brushing my teeth for a day, or for a full week, I guess. But it's interesting how habitual it's become. And I look back, I don't think I've missed a week. In fact, I don't think I've missed a deadline, with a couple of exceptions in a few years. It's Thursday, 7 a.m. Eastern. And I think once if you like something and you do it in a routine way, you're going to stick with it. And that's certainly been the case with this.
Right. So how has your style of bike touring changed over the last 7 years?
Well, when I started, I was full on amateur. Let's be honest. I think that anytime you start in something, you sort of like start with what you've got, and you sort of slowly learn as you go along. And that was certainly true for me. I look back on my early tours, and I had the car camping gear that was just sort of bungeed to one single back rack, and that was it. It's amazing what you learn. And then especially with bicycle touring, as you start to decide that you're liking it enough, and then you start to invest in some of the gear, you get the uniform, right? You get your Ortley panniers, and you get all of those other things, and maybe you graduate to a more touring style bike and get the front rack, and basically add all those things together. Then you start to feel kind of a little bit more legit. But I do have to say that when I started off, that was where the real adventure really was, because it was sort of, I don't know if you had the same thing. Like when I was a kid, the bicycle was this key to adventure. And I grew up not far from Rochester, New York, on the Erie Canal Trail. And when I would go there on my little Huffy, I would stare in one direction. I'd be like, if I go 50 miles, I'm in Buffalo. And I would turn around, and I would like, if I go 300 miles, I'll be in Albany. And that just blew my little kid mind. And when I got to ride that for the first time a few years ago, it was just sort of like paying that back to 6-year-old me.
Nice. So you've also, I think another thing that we have in common is you've done some touring on the Brompton. What made you try that out?
Well, you is probably part of it, because you and Laura, with all what you did and what you pulled off, I just was so enamored with the functionality of this. Everybody knows who listens to my show, I call this the little clown bike. It's amazing how packable and how portable it is. But then when I saw the videos that you did about what you could accomplish with it as a touring vehicle, it was really amazing to me. And I've since done a few different things with how I approach it as a touring vehicle. But the backpack trick is super awesome. And it's amazing how much gear you can get in there and where you can go. The second I was able to, I took this bike up Big Sur, went from basically San Francisco to San Luis Obispo, up and down, real deal touring hills. And, it's just remarkable what it can do. And where it can take you. And the thing I love about it most is, and I still get a kick out of it, I still take a picture every time I stuff it in the overhead of an airplane. And, it's just like, this is a true global touring bicycle when it all comes down to it. And built really well. And I'm just in love with the Brompton. I really, really like it. But it's not something that replaces everything. And I think that you found the same thing. I'm not going to be able to take this out on a gnarly gravel ride or anything like that. I've got another bike to do more kind of off-road kind of stuff, but for what it does, I love it.
Yeah, it's super capable. That's one of the things that attracted me to trying to tour with it. Because at that time, their bike packing was just starting to take off, and there's so much attention to having the right gear. And it was interesting to see how the Brompton only has 6 gears, to really experiment with, can you tour with anything? And it's super capable. It has its kind of parameters that you have to work inside, but it's a super capable machine.
I cheated a little bit. I actually got a special speed hub on it, so I actually have 12 gears on mine. Yeah, nice. I did. One of the things that I wanted to make sure is that the lowest gear I could get possible. And I worked with the folks at Clever Cycles in Portland, and their mechanics there are legit when it comes to these bikes, and worked with them. And that's the other beauty of it. It's one of those types of bikes that you really do get to build yourself. And that was a fun process. That was the first time I had ever gotten to do anything like that. But yeah, I got 12 on this one.
Did they have to spread the rear triangle, or do you know what they did?
No, it's one of those hubs where it's like, you activate it, but with a kick, there's a button.
Okay.
It's on the other side of the bike, I'm afraid, so I can't show you. But it is, it's all internally hubbed. It's really clever. Clever Cycles, haha. Not a promotion for them, but they were super clever.
Yeah, so that's a schlumpf drive, right? Where you kick it with your heel, and that gives you basically 2x6, or
yeah, it's not schlumpf. It's made by a Korean company. I think it was called Dino Hub or something like that. I'm not sure if they're still around, but fantastic. It works really well, and it's nice because when I'm in the city, I'll stay in the high gears when I'm on flats and whatnot. But it's got a pretty climby gear. I mean, enough to do Big Sur and some other hills. Where else have I been with it? In Washington State on the Pacific Coast during some of the. It's not as hilly as other parts of the Pacific Coast, but some of the steeper hills in Washington State worked pretty great.
Yeah. I remember like doing some hills in New Zealand where it was just a constant roller coaster of like 14 to 18% grades on the Brompton, and that was a chore. I missed having lower than the even the Touring 6 speeds that they offered at the time.
Yeah, the one thing that the mechanic at Clever gave me the permission structure to do, he's like, dude, if it's too hard, just get off and push, man. And like, honestly, like, I had always thought, oh, that's a badge of failure to get off and push. It means you can't do it. And then when he's saying it, I don't know why that gave me that great bit of permission, but there are times in Big Sur when I was just like, no, I can do better if I push this thing up the last bit of this ridiculous hill here. So yeah, and New Zealand, real deal hills. So yeah.
Right. Nice. So you recently did an episode on touring during the pandemic. You came away with some pretty good thoughts. Can you share some of them?
Yeah, I think that everyone's got their own take on this, but I think that there's some kind of global things that maybe we can all agree on, without getting into too much of the crazy political stuff with all of this. But I think that, if the idea here is that you don't want to catch it and you don't want to do anything to possibly spread it to anybody else. If those are the values that you've got, then I think that bicycle touring can be consistent with those values. And my attitude with all of this is that I tend to bike solo anyways. So that is great. Social distancing on a bike is really easy for me. The other thing was that it doesn't take a lot in the type of routes that I do locally here on the C&O, the Chesapeake and Ohio towpath, and the Great Allegheny Passage also, which connects up to the C&O, that, I can do things in a way where I can have really minimal interactions with people and really minimal contacts in any of the trail towns. And when you added all of that up, it was like, okay, bicycle touring is good for me and it's good for my health. And if I can do it in a way that's responsible and good, well, why not go for it? And as it turned out, it worked out really well. I've done a couple of rides on the C&O this season since all of this started. And then just recently, I did a good chunk of the Great Allegheny Passage as a part of a big loop that I did. And it's been great. And what was also really interesting was to see that there are other folks that are out there that are sort of practicing it in a good, responsible way, or at least the way that I would consider good and responsible. And then I would see a few people that weren't. And, it's just sort of like, all right, well, you know what? I'm just going to avoid those folks and ride my ride, which is sort of the mantra that I have on the show. And, it is something that has helped me personally through gestures broadly, all of this.
Right. Yeah, I have to admit that with the pandemic, it's taken away, one of the big things that we loved about touring, and that was visiting small towns and going to the local restaurants and that kind of whole, cultural experience. I think some people go touring or bike packing to get away from everybody, but for us, it was always about a way to sink in and kind of explore the small towns. And now that that's kind of verboten, it's changed the dynamic so much.
Yeah, you have to find what works for you within bike touring. There are definitely trade-offs because I'm with you. I like a little bit of everything. I like interacting with people. I love the people that you meet on tour. In some ways, the people that you meet is more interesting than the ride itself. But yeah, you got to be mindful of, okay, I'm coming from a place and I'm going to another place. And if I am carrying this virus asymptomatically, I don't want to be responsible for spreading it to a single person at all. That's part of the problem. So yeah, you have to kind of do the math and you have to kind of figure out what's the right headspace to be in with all of this. And that does mean that there are some compromises with what you have to do. But if it's a difference between going out and enjoying a ride and not, I was like, okay, compromises are fine. Let me go out and do this ride the way that I can responsibly in the here and now. And I feel like it's been rewarding for me.
Yeah. I listened to that episode and you brought up a good point of, if you do want to scratch that itch, then maybe a bike overnight that potentially ends or stops at a tent in your backyard is perfectly acceptable.
If that's what you've got, if that's all you've got, that's a perfectly great little adventure. Go off and do a big loop and end up in your backyard. If camping is what you need and what you're craving and there's no good place to do it, you can't find a stealth camping spot, you don't have a state park that's open or a local park or whatever, do what you can to get the adventure that you need in your system, because that's the one thing that I realized when I first started bicycle touring. My sense of adventure had disappeared for a while because, when I lived in Oregon, I was climbing mountains or falling off of mountains really, but that's a longer story. And, it's just like, I didn't have that in my life. And when I found it, it gave a real sense of purpose to me and a real sense of adventure. And if I didn't have that through this, man, I don't know, I'd be drinking a lot more than I have been. We'll just put it that way.
Can relate. Okay, so we're 16 minutes in. If you guys in the YouTube comments have any questions for Tim, leave those in the comments. I'll be sure to relay them. And if you're digging the content so far, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. It helps the channel, all that stuff. So let's talk touring gear for a hot second. What things do you bring on every single tour that you think are essential or your favorite items?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's nice and broad in a way because it's like it depends on the route. It depends on the bike I'm bringing too. But I think the thing that comes with me every time is my classic orange back roller Ortliebs. They are bulletproof. They have lasted forever. I think I've had to replace some of the straps and things like that. But man, it's amazing. I've put tenacious tape over some of the little pinholes that'll appear. But at the same time, they're really, really fantastic. Well worth the investment that I put in way back when. But it's funny. Some of the comfort items that I find, this is going to sound weird. The inflatable pillow, it is helpful for sleep. I have found, that's a really helpful thing. But also merino wool. I'm a full-on convert to merino wool. Like I am wearing it, around the house lately a lot too, just because it stands up really well. It just is a fantastic material. And I remember my buddy MJ, who I kind of got into touring with him. He was always like, all I wear is merino wool. And I'm like, I don't need that, man. I got my synthetic stuff. And then over the years, I sort of was like, no, MJ was right. This stuff is awesome. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I know looking at what we've taken, there's a couple things that that we took at the very beginning that still find their way in our bike bags. And one of them is just a small little Opnel knife that we've had for over a decade. It's got like a wooden handle. I think the tip of the blade's broken and it's super rusty, but just really easy to sharpen. It has lots of usage, so it's been places.
You're a coffee guy. I'm an AeroPress guy, so I that's another kind of thing. When I'm brewing my own coffee, I really enjoy bringing.
Yeah. I'm curious, like when you do trips with the intent to create a podcast, what's your podcasting setup look like?
It is so minimal. When I first started recording in the field, I bought a very specific, Apple specific microphone that fit into the iPhone, and I found that it was a garbage microphone. And over the years, Apple's iPhone microphones have gotten really, really good, the internal ones. But what is shocking to me still is one of the best small microphones that you can have on you are those dopey white earbuds. They have a pretty excellent microphone, and I think part of it is just microphone placement. If there's one thing you learn doing audio for all the years like I have, it's a good mic is really nice to have. Something like, I mean, this is a 15-year-old mic right here, but it's placement. Like, how close are you? Because the further away from your audio source, the audio degrades remarkably. And because those white earbuds are just sort of hanging right by your mouth, they do a really great job. And I'm often complimented by, oh, wow, you must have one of those Zoom H5s or, some fancy equipment. And it's just like, nah, man, I just bring my phone and I talk into it. And, there is a little bit of post-production work that you can do to sweeten up the sound and everything. But, it's bring what you got. And, it's the old thing about, and you're a camera guy too. It's sort of like, the best camera is the one that you'll use. Well, same thing is true when it comes to recording the audio.
Do you record to something like Hindenburg, or do you just use the built-in audio app?
I have used a variety of different options. When I was doing it in what I call the quasi live shows that I was doing for the podcast supporters, what I would do is I would record it I can't even remember what kind of an app. It was an app that basically it recorded for you and then put it into Dropbox. And then I had some little back end internet apps that did some magic and made that into an RSS feed. And that basically, from the moment I hit stop on the record, it would fly up into the cloud, work its magic through the internet, and within about 5 minutes, it would be downloading into people's devices if they had their podcatchers.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Which was pretty crazy. Now, again, I've gone back to simple. Because Apple's voice memo app is optimized for its internal microphone, the fidelity you can get on that thing, even though it compresses into, I think, an AAC file, man, it's fantastic. So I've actually just been using that lately for a lot of my field stuff. But I also have another recorder that also will link up to some cloud-based storage as well, just because you never know. I mean, I've lost a phone on a tour before, and if you lose that much audio, I mean, that's just heartbreaking, to lose that kind of data. So I do try to get that stuff up into the cloud as quick as I can.
Nice. Cool. So we got a question here from Chris. What's the one thing you would share with someone or a group who's about to ride the Gap in C&O in 3 weeks? Very specific. I wonder if it's him.
Chris, will I be seeing you on the Gap in C&O? Because am I on in 3 weeks? No, I'm going to be a week or so later. I think I'm going to be doing another ride on the C&O. I think the first thing that I would say is that there seem to be teams. There seems to be Team Gap and Team C&O, and I am firmly and perhaps famously on Team C&O, because you got to work for that trail. I mean, it is not, in some parts they're actually putting down a really nice surface and it's much better, but there are some days when that trail does not love you back at all. And I think that you need to be prepared for that. If you're starting from Pittsburgh and working to DC, you're going to be on this, groomed, beautiful trail, and it's going to be flat. And if you catch some rain in the wrong spots, maybe it won't be so hot. I'll tell you what, though, if you hit the C&O and you get some bad weather, it's going to be a little bit of a slog, and you're going to be surprised perhaps by the real change in trail conditions. Going the other direction, get that out of the way, and then get up the big hill, and then you've got this beautiful multi-day, mostly downhill grade, very slight, all the way to Pittsburgh. But know those distinctions. But the other thing is that the camping scenarios, if you're camping, are so great on the C&O. It's almost literally every 10 miles. You've got so many different options. You don't have to plan your trip really, really down to the mile unless that's your bag. And I think that it's just one of those, it's one of the crown jewels, I mean, of bicycle touring. And I'm so spoiled to have it. The fact that I'm literally where I'm sitting right now, 7 miles away downhill, thankfully, to an illegal bridge crossing that gets me to the C&O, but that's for another story. and it's just there's so much history, there's so much nature, and you can get whatever you need out of it and then come back and do it in a different way down the line. So if it's your first time, it was Chris, right? Chris, if it's your first time, it's going to be the trip of a lifetime. But what I hope is that it encourages you to come back, because I've ridden the C&O a million times and the Gap fewer times because it's harder for me to get to. But I learn something new every time. I meet new people every time, and I get a new story to tell every single time. It's just one of my favorite places to bike in the world, outside of the Oregon coast, which I can't get to. So I'm going to have to go bike this trail a few more times.
We've actually never ridden either. But it's definitely on the bucket list. What's the surface like? Like, how much tire do you need to pedal comfortably?
Well, strangely enough, I rode on the C&O for a stretch with this bike, and that was something I didn't expect to be able to do. I don't know if that speaks more towards what the conditions were at the time or how well built the Brompton is, but you can really get away with riding on maybe not a skinny tire per se, but something that is narrower than you would expect. I read a lot on Reddit boards. Reddit boards are funny. Where there's the expert that comes in and is just like, need full suspension and must have big knobby tires, otherwise worst ride ever. And I'm just like, okay, I mean, sure, if that's what you need, do it. But yeah, I think that you can ride almost any bike on the C&O. But if you're catching summer thunderstorms and the thing is a muddy slog, it's a very clayey surface, as in made of clay, and it will get in between your tires and your fenders real quick. And there are stretches that can be really bad. But they are resurfacing a lot of the C&O to be kind of the new version of what the Gap has, the Great Allegheny Passage, and that's just tremendous. It drains really well. It rides like a dream. So in some parts, it's still the old historic path, kind of crushed limestone. But in other areas, it's this new modern surface, which is just fantastic. And of course, the Gap is almost all that.
Have you been able to tell if there's been more ridership since COVID on the C&O?
That was what I was trying to figure out with this last ride on the Gap. And if I were to judge based on the campgrounds and who I was seeing around there, I'd say that ridership was lower. But I think what I'm seeing is, and I should say ridership, touring is lower. But what I will tell you is I think that there are far more people who are riding it as in a day use capacity than before. And it's interesting because, when you're touring and you're running into big swaths of day users, it's sort of like, well, wait a second, man, this is my trail or whatever, but then at the same time, I'm like, this is what I've always wanted. I wanted more people to get on these two trails in particular and discover how awesome they are. So, considering all of this going on, and sometimes outdoor activity is all we really have, I'm so grateful that we've got these resources for folks from Pittsburgh all the way to DC and everything in between to be able to get out there and kind of just, blow off some steam on the trails and do their thing. So I would say day users way up. I would say camping, touring, from what I've seen, small sample size, but seems lower to me.
Yeah. I'd be curious, there's all the anecdotal stories about bike shops being sold out of bikes, if everyone that buys a bike in Pittsburgh is just taking it on the trails.
Could be. I mean, I in DC, it's happening. I know it's happening in Portland. Sounds like in Missoula as well. That's fascinating to me that bike shops are seeing success from all of this, where so many other businesses are failing. It's sad for those other businesses, but it's like, I'm so grateful that the local bike shops are not feeling that same kind of economic pinch, because we're going to need them after all of this is over, whenever that may be. If it's in 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, whatever. I'm grateful that they're going to be around, because they're my friends. Yeah.
Cool. So we got a question here from Brian. Tim's, any plans to do more YouTube content or just stick to the podcast?
Brian, you've seen
media.
Yeah, Brian. First of all, I will not take on this gentleman here. He's got the YouTube thing going on. I do have a YouTube channel for folks that don't know, and I generally just tend to put the podcast on there just as another place for people to consume it, because I understand from that the kids, the younglings out there, to use a little Jedi nomenclature, they often will listen via YouTube, which sounds strange, but it's true. I have done some ham-handed attempts at sort of mini documentary-ish versions of my tour journals. The problem is it just takes a lot of time and effort. And Russ, I see your head nodding because you know better than anybody else in the world. And I'm untrained, learning as I go along. I would love to do more. I took off the last year or maybe 2 years from doing that kind of stuff, because it is also much more effort when you're out there riding. And, you know, to a certain degree, I'm writing also for myself to enjoy. When you're taking all of that video footage and doing all of the audio content, you know, you're ending up making it more of frankly, a job, which is fine because I like it and everything. So I think that the answer is probably at some point. I think it's going to depend on what ride. We'll have to see. I don't know, and it may not be until next year, because I think that I've got maybe another ride or two in me this season. And normally I like to go down to Florida the last couple of years and do a ride across Central Florida. I don't think I'm going to be doing that this year. No. January, February, you know, at first I thought, well, maybe things will be better by then. But right now it's like the prospect of getting in a plane to do a bike ride. I'm just sort of like, you know what? It doesn't feel like the right time for me. So we'll have to see. Maybe more. Yeah.
I can attest that it's very much a time suck to bring the camera step and film and then, you know, try to document your trip. And it kind of puts you in a different mind state. You know, with video, you kind of need to piece a narrative together. So getting that B-roll. So whenever we do a trip and I'm filming with the intent of putting it on YouTube, I feel like I'm experiencing everything through like 3 or 4 layers of filters already, and you feel less present. So we definitely try to build in trips where there's no cameras involved, no expectations of creating media.
That's really smart. When we talk, for folks who haven't listened, with the tables were turned a couple of years ago, and I interviewed Russ, and Russ talked about, you talked about your storytelling, and how you would kind of enter into how you would shoot something. You'd have kind of a basic idea going into it so that you could kind of shoot around all of that. And, you know, there's just a ton more thought that has to go into that mode of communication. You know, with audio, I'm just some dope who has to talk into a microphone, and I can kind of, you know, yes, I'll capture, you know, the soundscape and everything else that's going on. But when you're taking actual video as well, you got to be concerned about good audio on top of all of that, and framing and piecing together these narratives. It's a lot more work. It's a real huge degree of difficulty jump, which is why I think I've sort of stayed in my lane for audio for the most part. But you know, I'm so glad I did do the video that I did, because, for instance, I did a ride across Missouri on the Katy Trail, and you know, I've got addled, you know, Gen X brain, and you know, I've forgotten a few chunks of that ride. And during all of this, I went back and I watched that video series, and I was like, I've forgotten about that. I'd forgotten that my bike nearly blew up, and I was going by the one bike shop in Sedalia, you know, and I got really lucky. And it was like, I'm glad I had that narrative in video form to remind me about that ride. So, you know, to a certain degree, obviously I'm doing this for the listeners and for the folks that enjoy the podcast, but it's also a freaking great journal for what I'm doing as well, to look back upon as well. So it's pretty great.
Yeah. So Chris here asks, why do you think camping is way down? Do you think it's because people are back to work and therefore is day trips day trips only due to lack of other alternatives? Or I like, what do you think?
You know, I don't know. I can speculate. I think on the C&O and the Gap, a lot of the folks travel from other parts of the country and indeed the world. I'll run into a lot of folks from the UK and Germany on that trail. So I think that obviously we don't have any of the international folks coming into the States to travel on these trails. So that's got to be at least a piece of it. I think also, I think that there are still people that are like, you know what, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm not going to go out. I'm not going to do this because I I don't see the benefit to exposing myself to other places or whatever people's reasoning and choices are for all of that. And also bear in mind, my data points are just my observations. You know, I'm not on the trail every single day. I can only report what I've seen on the days that I've been out there. I pay attention to another couple of local writers as well on Facebook, and I think that they see kind of the same things as well. So I guess, you know, to sum it all up, don't know.
I know we live here in Missoula, and it's, you know, headquarters of adventure cycling. And, you know, typically in normal years, in the before time, it would have been a tradition if you were touring through to stop at the office, get your picture taken, eat your ice cream, and they put your Polaroid up on the wall. You know, adventure cycling's been kind of trying to discourage people from doing a big trip this year because of the pandemic. People have still been coming through. And, you know, the numbers are way down. It's probably, I don't know, where they'd have a couple hundred through. I don't think it's, I don't know the exact number, but it's like a fraction of what they've gotten in years past. So I think people are definitely less motivated, just being cautious. And like you said, international travel is a big chunk of it. And I feel like something like the CNO and the Gap, those are definitely destination trails that people would travel long distances to experience.
I also think that for a lot of longer term tours, not everybody does 100% camping. And I think the fact that, you know, you could be, or even as a backup plan, you know, getting a hotel night, working with warm showers or anything along those lines, Airbnb, I think folks are much less apt to want to have to tap into that. And so unless they're really, really committed to full 100% camping, I think a lot of folks are just kind of saying, look, I can't do 100% camping because I do need my hotel night. I need my shower. I don't trust necessarily that an Airbnb or a warm shower setup is going to be right for me. So I think that might be a piece of it as well. I mean, this thing's shaking up everything. Why not bicycle touring too? Right.
Yeah, I'm curious to see like when or if things will ever be like they were. You know, I wonder how many warm showers hosts have either you know, just stopped for the year, or, you know, reconsidering being a host at all in the future with the way things are going. I feel like a lot of the infrastructure that, you know, we could rely on as a touring cyclist in the past is either, you know, no longer in existence or is hanging on by a thread, especially after this year.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question to ask. You know, it's like, are we going to be more or less apt to invite people into our homes or our yards or whatever while this virus is going on? I mean, I think the answer is pretty self-evident. I think a lot of folks won't consider something like that. They won't even be the ones that'll travel, much less be the ones that'll host. And that is something that I think was a really huge piece of bicycle touring, at least in this country. I certainly see evidence of that in other countries as well. But yeah, I mean, and you know, now we're starting to hear that we still don't have a vaccine yet, as if that is the magic bullet we're all looking for. But then you got to think about distribution of that and how is that going to look? You know, this is a long-term situation that we're in right now, and you know, however it ends up shaking out, eventually someday we'll get to the other end of this. I mean, even the 1918 influenza pandemic, we got to the end of that, right? But right. You know, it might take a while.
Yeah. All right, you guys in the YouTube comments, if you guys have any questions, leave those in the comments section. And if you're digging this video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Let's see.
If you don't have any good questions, I'm going to make Russ weigh something.
Right. Here, Brian says that he watched all of your K-Trail videos to help him prep for his ride.
Well, nice. Did you make it? Because, you know, you never know.
Right.
Yeah, the Katie's a fun one. I enjoyed it, although it was so hot. Missouri, man. I love me some show me state, but I'll tell you what, there is a special amount of heat and humidity that happens there. It was something. It was May, and it was just so hot. The first day, and Brian can back me up on this. The first day, there's a piece of the video of me just sort of like staring, going, "Yeah, great ride today." And I remember I was like lying down, like on my back on the trail, going, how am I going to get my miles in today? And then later on that first night, I had for the first time in my life, but not the last time, as listeners to my show know, these massive, like full leg cramps where I'm like crawling to my frame bag to try to get the electrolyte pills out to stop the pain. It was type 2 fun, as they say, right?
Yes. So Brian survived, thankfully.
we spoiler alert, Brian made it. We're glad. So
do you have any kind of bucket list tours that you want to do in the future once travel is a thing again, or destinations you want to visit by bike?
There's a few places that I've wanted to go to. One is around the Big Bend area in Texas. There's supposed to be some really fantastic cycling down there. So that's something that has sort of been interesting to me. I haven't done an east to west or west to east cross-country tour yet. And I think that that's definitely in the cards. I've been very interested in the northern tier. But I think North Dakota is such kind of a hot mess with everything, but maybe even that's changing because the fracking situation is different there. So maybe the trucks aren't there as much. It's in a bit of a flux. So then I've been interested in the southern tier a little bit more. And then of course there's the Trans Am. So basically all three, right? I've been looking to do it in pieces as well. That's another thing that I'm thinking, but, and one other one, I mentioned my buddy MJ before. The Idaho Hot Springs route looks really, really fun, and it would force me to buy a gravel bike. So maybe I would actually do that. Oh, darn, I have to buy another bike.
I know, shucks.
And one other one for international listeners and viewers. My cousin Sarah lives in Brussels, Belgium. And when we are allowed to go to Europe again, my partner Kimberly is in love with the city of Paris, and Paris is awesome. And so I think the next time, whenever that may be, that we're out in Paris together, I may take a couple of days and ride to go visit my cousin in Brussels. It's not supposed to be the most picturesque route, but what the heck, crossing an international boundary by bicycle sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, one thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently, especially with like the big ACA east to west routes, is this idea that touring routes are dynamic. We think of them as quasi permanent, like being kind of frozen and what it was like in '76. But with population growth, you mentioned fracking, all sorts of other environmental, cultural, factors. Like the routes are constantly changing. Especially with like the weather and smoke, and so it's interesting to think of as a route that you could have ridden a decade ago, or someone could have ridden 20 years ago, and you're not going to have anything remotely like a similar experience.
Yeah, growth patterns, all sorts of things have really changed these. I'm intrigued with this Great American Rail Trail project that's out there. What the tour that I did last spring was linking together 3 different routes. Of course, starting off in DC with the C&O to the Gap. Well, that was easy because it just starts right there in Cumberland. But then connecting the end of the Gap to the Ohio to Erie Trail, and I figured out a road route that was okay-ish. But then to be able to basically say that I was almost not entirely, of course, but minus maybe 60 miles worth of road. I was on a trail from DC all the way to Cincinnati via Cleveland. That was pretty cool. So I'm intrigued with that project. I think I'm a little skeptical that we're going to kind of make this thing one contiguous trail, but I think it's a dream big. We should dream big for this kind of stuff because there was a point when the Great Allegheny Passage was, just a bunch of small regional trails that weren't connected together. And now it's one of the great trails in the country. So, why not dream big and see what we can do?
Yeah, for sure. All right, we got Sprocket Podcast in the chat. Have you modified the bike tour draft rules and gameplay for COVID times? So fill us in. What is that exactly?
So, okay, pre-COVID. Remember pre-COVID back in January? This is the 3rd reference to Mysterious James, my buddy. He was in town, and so I did 3 consecutive weeks of podcasts with him because he hadn't been on the podcast for years. And so I convinced him after a few drinks to do a bicycle touring draft. He had no idea what it was. He doesn't follow sports or anything like that. So he had no idea what a draft was. So I had to explain that to him. And so what we did was we constructed, there's different rounds in each player gets to pick a bicycle touring item, and then once that category is taken, it's removed for other people. So you basically are trying to create your bike tour, excluding what other folks can do. It's a little, I think it was a ham-handed way of putting it. But and then I repeated it with the Sprocket folks, and Aaron Flores took my championship belt away from me in a controversial vote, I might add. There were 8 votes for Aaron in a row, I'll add. I'm not saying that there was voter fraud, but like I'm just suggesting that Aaron had a lot of fans all in a row. Anyways, point being, the post-COVID rules would be very interesting. I think maybe it's the holiday special. Gentle Sprocket Podcast goes to has access to the count, whichever one you are. It's probably Aaron.
Nice. Yeah, you should. You guys should do a live stream using StreamYard. That'd be a fun holiday podcast / live stream.
Well, I'm putting you on the spot right now. You are invited to the next bicycle tour draft.
All right. Cool. Let's see. We'll see where we are. We're gonna our plans for the winter are very dynamic, and we may not be here. Ideally, we won't be where there's snow, so you can still ride bikes.
I was just gonna say, if you have the opportunity to get out of Missoula, Montana for a winter, I think unless you're a snow guy, then
I'm not.
Someplace warm would probably be better, right?
Nice. Dan says, I ain't snitching, but Aaron just cheered.
Anna's laugh is contagious, and I wish I could hear it right now. That's all I'm saying.
Nice. All right, you guys in the YouTube chat, do you have any other questions for Tim, or just general bike touring questions? We've got Tim, he's a resident expert of the CNO. So do you have any favorite campsites that, when you go out, like you aim for that one because of whatever, it's picturesque, it's got nice facilities?
Yeah, the two that I love, Potomac Forks, which is about maybe 20 miles outside of Cumberland, so on the western side of the trail. It's the only one where the campground is on the right side of the trail as you're heading west, which is weird, and it's peculiar, and it's got this big water feature and one of those old canal houses. I just love that one. But the one that I think is just the best on the whole trail is the one that's right outside of Harper's Ferry. Of course, it's on the Maryland side of the river. It's called Huckleberry Hill. It's the perfect distance from Washington, D.C. It's 62.9 miles. So it's just that perfect distance from D.C. that if you're doing a full day ride out of D.C., you'll get there at the end of your day, and it's right on the river, and it's just got this beautiful picturesque view, and you just never get sick of it. And I've met some of the most interesting people there. It's also where the Appalachian Trail intersects and crosses over with the CNO for a bit. So sometimes you'll get a chance to hang out with hikers. And I just really, that one's a really special one for me. But I don't think there's a bad one. There are some that have trade-offs. I actually, one of my tours, I filmed every single one of those 32 campsites, and I put those up on YouTube, and thinking, maybe this will be helpful for folks. Well, that's been the most downloaded thing that I've ever put up on there. And because what it is it allows you to visualize it, and there's tons of guidebooks and things like that. But to be able to kind of walk around around any given one and know, this one's really up above the river, or this one's much bigger because we got a big group. So I thought that was kind of cool. But it's also just nice to catalog these wonderful campgrounds. Sure. They're fantastic.
Yeah. Cool. So Sprocket asks, he doesn't know if this was mentioned, but have you had to rely more on bandit / dispersed camping since COVID?
So most of the touring that I've done so far has been in designated campgrounds on these trails, on the CNO and on the Gap. But there was one trip that I did that was on, I think it was 4th of July weekend, and I think I did a podcast on this one. I decided, and this is when I had the little clown bike on the CNO. Because my other bike was in the shop, and I was like, I don't know how good this is going to go, so I'm only going to go out 10 miles. And there's a couple of spots in the 10-mile zone outside of DC really, really close to where the Beltway is. If you're not familiar with DC, you'll always hear in the Beltway and out of the Beltway. That's I-495. It goes all around the general area of DC. It includes Maryland and Virginia as well. So I found a couple of really good stealth camping spots over the years, and I decided to go there for just like an S240 kind of a thing. And that was great. That might have been one of my favorite rides of this entire era, shall we say? Can we call this an era? So yeah, I think that, stealth camping, abandoned camping, whatever you want to call it, is a really useful tool in all of this. If that's something that you're comfortable with. I just was out on the Eastern Shore out in Virginia in the Delmarva Peninsula this past week, and I was scoping out spots for potential wild camping or stealth camping in that area. And I was really happy that there were a lot of different possibilities in there. But that's kind of also another thing that I found is fun, since I've been doing more of it, is just as I'm riding kind of, and even just driving around sometimes, I'll be like, ooh, cool. There's lots of good stealth camping there, and Kimberly, my partner, will be like, yes, I know. She's like, oh yeah, I get it. Yeah, that's really dense forest. That's great.
Right.
But yeah, I think relying on it or looking for it can be really helpful. And again, it's a comfort zone thing for a lot of folks. I know a lot of folks, A, they're not going to camp at all. B, sometimes the folks that will camp, they want to be in a more designated space. And that makes sense too, more amenities, things like that. But if you come from a backpacking perspective, and you're used to kind of not having toilets at all and doing backcountry technique, stealth camping is a nice little tool to have in your arsenal.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm a big food person. Food's very important when I go touring. What's the food situation on the CNO, like say pre-COVID? Was there many opportunities to, get groceries or cute diners, or what's it like?
Yeah, I would say it's funny on the DC side of things. It's really it's unusually quiet in a way. There's a couple of places, but you have to kind of ride off a little bit to get to some grocery stores like near Great Falls and places like that. As you get a little bit further down the trail and you're going through more towns, like kind of classic trail towns, Brunswick's got a great brewery and a pizza shop. They used to have my favorite taco place in the entire region. It was called El Sloppy Taco. Don't be fooled by the name. Legit tacos there. So we have to pour one out for El Sloppy Taco. It's not with us anymore. Yeah. Harper's Ferry's got some stuff going on. I'm trying to think as we go down the trail. And then, to be honest, the CNO gets real wildernessy pretty quickly. You got the town of Hancock after that, which is actually not far from where I'm at right now. And there's a couple of places there, but you are going to be relying a little bit more on each of the trail towns, depending on how many miles you're doing in a day, or hauling some food with you. So it's much more of a kind of camping experience type of situation. Gotcha. You can do an end-to-end situation if you'd like. It's certainly more than possible. You could ride to Harper's Ferry, ride to Hancock, and then ride to Cumberland, and you could stay at hotels or places like that, and get nice dinners in town every night if that's your bag. And I know a lot of people who do it that way. I kind of like mixing it up. I've done it different ways. The Florida trips that I've done on the Brompton here, that's all Airbnb, and that's just super luxe for me. I'm just like, oh, got a shower every night, get to sleep in a bed. Hey man, I made a lightsaber at Disney World on one of my trips. Nice. It's just like different tours for different things.
For sure. So someone here asked, what is your preferred direction? Is there one way that you suggest is better than the other?
Tracy, that's a classic question, man. I'm back and forth. I think that I've started from the DC to Pittsburgh direction just to be a contrarian, because I've talked with a guy who works for the organization that helps run the Gap, or at least does the promo for the Gap. And he's told me on a pod a few years ago that he thinks it's about 2-1 Pittsburgh to DC. I found when the Gap was defeating me the first few times. I had mechanicals on a couple of trips, and I was having trouble coming from Pittsburgh to DC for some reason. So I felt like it was cursed in that way. So when I did it in the opposite direction, it was no problem. So maybe that's a piece of it. The Gap is a funny trail. There's one big incline that gets you to the Eastern Continental Divide if you're coming from Cumberland. It's about 2-3 hours of climbing. If you've done any other touring in any place with actual real deal hills, you'll snicker at it, but it's a pretty consistent grade. It's not that bad, but you have to do it. And then you have from the top of the Eastern Continental Divide at about it's like mile marker 30 or so. I don't think he's even that far, all the way to Pittsburgh for the next, bunch of miles, 120 miles. It's like a 1% grade for the most part down. And you would think that wouldn't be a big deal coming from the opposite direction. But I'm here to tell you, I've ridden it from Pittsburgh in the other direction. And every single time that grade kicks my butt. Just because there's no rest at all. You're constantly spinning into this teeny tiny hill. And it wears on you, especially if it's a hot day, which it typically is for me. So I think that what I've come to, Tracy, so here I'm coming all the way back in this big long circuitous route back to your question. I like knocking out the grade going from DC to Pittsburgh. So from Cumberland up to the top of that grade, knock it all off. And then I said this to folks that I ran into on this last trip. When you get to the top of that grade and you start rolling towards Pittsburgh, it's like you've got a rocket tied to the back of your bike. You just feel like you will make miles like you've never made before. I've never, I think, ridden faster on a trail than I do on the gap going in that direction. And it feels so great. So yeah, I think that's it. But I would say, you know what? I know I'm in the minority on this, but I don't think there's a bad way to do it. Go with whatever your travel situation is best, because it may be easier for you to get to Pittsburgh than it is to get to DC. Then start in Pittsburgh and go. I don't think there's it's not like going south to north on the Pacific coast. Not recommended. Right. I've done a bit of it that way. And that was the first and last time I'll do that.
Nice. Cool. So you guys in the YouTube chat, if you have any other questions for Tim, ask now or soonish. We're hitting the hour mark. Let's see.
I see Byron from Down Under. He says, "Woohoo! Didn't miss all of this. Hello, sir."
Nice. So for the podcast, do you have any vision of what you want to do with it? But, is it going to be around in a couple of years? Like, what are your hopes for the podcast in the future?
What's funny is I am normally a planner, like kind of obsessive. If anybody's listening to my show, you know how I plan out my rides and all of that. I have no real plans for the podcast specifically. I'm not even remotely tired of it. It's part of my life. I love the community. I love, running into folks. I just got an email the other day from a guy who I ran into in Ohio. And he's like, "Oh, I don't know if you remember me. Me and my wife rode with you." And I was like, "My man, that was one of my favorite days riding ever." So that alone, that kind of interaction that I get, gives me energy to do this podcast for a while. I think that it's always going to evolve. I think I've been interviewing more people, and then I took a little bit of a break. I've been doing more of the tour journals for a while. That may stick around, or maybe that'll ebb and I'll do something different. But I really like that folks have stuck with it through all the iterations of it. And I love doing it. And as long as there's people who are listening, I don't see any reason why I'll quit. I don't know, maybe episode 1,000 or something.
Nice. I'm getting close to 1,000 videos on the YouTube channel. I'm at about 900 and something, like 70 something or 80 something.
Have you ever talked to anybody who's done the full through view of them? Because I'm always impressed by people that have listened to every single episode of your show. But if somebody has watched all 1,000 of your videos, those folks you need to send them your weighing device, or something, some kind of a prize for that.
Yeah. Cool. Let's see. Any other questions? Well, I think I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you, Tim, so much for being on the podcast on the live stream, which is kind of like a visual podcast. One could say.
It's all the same. I'm using my microphone.
Right. All right. Last question here. Any chance that you're coming down to Australia, either of you? You first.
Byron, if Australia will have me, which is an open question at this point. I have wanted to come to Australia forever. There's a guy by the name of Cody Orgill who's got a really good channel. Have you ever run into him, Russ? His stuff. He does some touring.
Videos, yeah.
He's Down Under, and he did a tour that looked really, really fun. I'd love to get down there. I've always wanted to. So yeah, I'm absolutely going to give that a shot at some point. But global conditions may have to change, and your country may have something to say about me coming. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'd love to go. We actually have, we sell merch, so like stickers and patches, and we actually, send a decent amount to Australia. So I feel like there's a burgeoning quirky, bikey community down there. I've recently gotten into birding, and Australia has some crazy birds. So
I can imagine.
It might be a bike and birding trip. I don't know what the trout fishing situation is like, but I will bring the binoculars if we get a chance to go. Let's see. So MVS says, finally seeing a face to PedalShift. Have you started listening to him he's just started listening to you for the last couple of weeks. So yes, this is PedalShift in the flesh.
In the flesh. Welcome, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was joking with the Sprocket podcast folks. Like with a live stream, it's tough because not only do you have to sound coherent, but you have to look, somewhat presentable as well.
I had to take a shower for this. Are you kidding me?
I know, yeah. Yeah, bike birding Colombia. That would sound amazing. There's supposed to be.
Sounds pretty good. I'd get into birding just to go to Colombia. I mean, that sounds pretty good. I
It's
get into birding
interesting.
just to go to Canada at this point.
It's an interesting hobby. I mean, like I didn't see the appeal to it. I mean, like initially I was thinking, well, what's the point of looking at these cute fluffy things? But birds actually live quite interesting lives. They're always killing something or averting death. In a very cute way.
You have solid side hobbies, Russ. I mean, you got the watercolor thing, which I'm super envious of, because if I did something like that, it would look like no different than a kindergartner. You got the birding, you got your fishing. I mean, you got it all going on. I need the only thing I've got is bike touring. I need to do bike touring, and
You do, yeah. It's always good to see. For me, adding those hobbies to bike touring is what keeps bike touring interesting. Like I realized that the act of riding a bike wasn't necessarily enough. Like I had to be able to interact with the environment in some other interesting way to keep my interest. So whether that's fishing, painting, or now birding, it's a good thing to mix in.
Maybe bike touring and improv or something wacky like that.
Yeah.
Just ride around the country and do impromptu improv classes. Maybe that would be fun, or not.
Nice. All right, so I'm going to take it home here. Thank you, Tim. For people that want to consume the podcast and do complete listen through, where should they go?
PedalShift.net on the internets, the series of tubes, or search for PedalShift on any of your favorite podcast apps, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, etc., etc.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us for this hour talking to Tim from PedalShift. Definitely check out his podcast. And we've got a bunch of interesting videos coming up this week. Tomorrow, I'm doing a deeper dive into that Ortlieb bike packing fork bag, kind of interesting hardware. So we show you how to install that. Doing finally the review on the budget Hunt wheels. That's 1,600 gram wheels for, I think, $430, how they fare. And speaking of wheels, the live stream for next week, we're going to be talking with some folks from DT Swiss. They just released a new set of gravel wheels, so we're going to talk about what makes a gravel wheel, and all that good stuff. So hopefully you like this live stream. I'm very tired today. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Consider supporting us on Patreon. Not only do you keep this content coming, and as Brian will attest to, I listen to the patrons and make their video dreams happen. You also get sweet discounts. The latest perk is 10% off of Ortlieb. Speaking of which, 20% off of Swift Industries. There's a deal with Reload Bags. So lots of the stuff that we feature on the channel, I've worked out some deals for channel supporters. So that's it for tonight. Until next time, keep the supple side down.